I have a son who's on the fetal alcohol spectrum. He also has autism, and a lot of times those two things are misdiagnosed one for the other. So fetal alcohol spectrum disorders can often be misdiagnosed as autism, and that's because they have some similar traits or characteristics. So these kids might have trouble socially. They might tend to perseverate on things, to get stuck on an idea or a thought. So there's some similar things to autism, but here's the thing. And this is, at least in my experience, this is how we've been able to tell the difference between our son's autistic traits and his fetal alcohol traits. And that is that we can't fix the fetal alcohol traits. We can't behavior therapy it out of him. We can't wish it out of him, pray it out of him. We can't rehabilitate it out of him. We can't teach him to think differently, to get around it. It just is. It's right there. Because it is permanent brain damage. It is damage that's been done to the brain that has affected those brain cells to where they did not develop. So what are some areas of the brain that are affected by this? The development of a conscience, that's a pretty devastating one. So a lot of these kids just simply, honestly, don't know right from wrong. They can't figure it out. They don't have the part of their brain that helps them reason that out. So clearly that can be a huge problem. They tend to have a very high impulsivity level. So when you add a lot of impulse, no impulse control, to a lack of a conscience, a lack of understanding of right from wrong, that can be devastating. And honestly, a lot of these kids are grow up to be grown-ups who are in jail because of that, because they have an impulse to do something. They don't have that thing inside their head going, hey, that's a really bad idea. So they do it anyway, and then they end up getting in trouble for it. And a lot of times when they get in trouble for it, and this can be true as children, not just adults, they are confused then. They don't understand why they're in trouble for it, because they don't understand that the world isn't as they perceive it. They look around and they see the world as one way. They're very, very, very concrete thinkers. So it's only what they can see in front of them. That's what happens. And so if I talked about confabulation, I think, last time I did a Mental Health Monday, where they just kind of make things up, or they seem to be making things up. They're not actually making things up. It's just that the world is that confusing to them that it seems like what they're saying is actually true to them, because they're only giving you what they have observed to be true. So that's a couple of issues. Another one, they might have memory issues. So in our case, our son is not able to remember events from his past. The only thing he can remember are things that he did that like the family might have photos of it, or he might have seen a video of it, or it's kind of part of the family lexicon where we tell the same story over and over and over again. So those are things that he can remember, and he can do this amazing thing where he can talk about those things in conversation, and he has developed these amazing coping mechanisms so that he can talk about that and sound like he's actually remembering it, when really all he's doing is describing a picture, describing a video, retelling a story that he's heard many, many times. I had a good friend who had to pick him up for church last Sunday, and we ran out of room in our cars, whatever, it was a thing. So I needed help. I had an extra kid I needed to get to church. She offered to pick him up. So we got to church, and I encountered her in the bathroom, and I said, hey, thanks for picking him up. And, I'm sorry he's not the great conversationalist. Hopefully it went okay. And she said, oh, what are you talking about? We had a great conversation. I just kind of said, okay. And I said, well, what'd you talk about? And she said, well, first I just asked him a lot of questions. I thought, okay, well, there we go. Because that's exactly when they start making things up, right? They'll ask a question, and then like my son, he'll just look at my face. If I ask him a question, he will try to figure out what he thinks I want to hear, and he will parrot that back. And he has a whole ready supply of movie lines and things he's read. to use as answers, as responses for those questions. And so then I said, oh, well, that's good. What else did you talk about? She said, well, I told him about my trip to Maine. And he told me about his trip to Maine. And I thought, oh, she hit the mother lode, because it just so happens that he'd been to Maine a couple of times with his best friend, and his best friend's mom had made him a little photograph album of that trip. So all the things that he told her about were things he has just been looking at that photo album now for a couple of years in a row, and he was just sharing with her what was in those pictures. So that's the hard thing about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, is these guys can appear to be very, very high functioning. They can establish some great, amazing coping mechanisms. And in the case of our son, I really feel like his autism helps him with the fetal alcohol problems, the damage done to fetal alcohol. Because another thing that might happen is they have very poor mapping skills, if you're familiar with what executive functioning is. So they can have none to little executive functioning skills. And executive functioning skills are what help you do problem solving and planning and scheduling and time telling, making time relevant for yourself. And this is very true for my son. He has very, very poor executive functioning skills. So he is a workhorse. He can get a task done. People love him. He's had a few jobs at his work training program this past year, and every single one of his employers on those jobs has loved the work he's done and wanted him back because he's a super hard worker. They give him a task and he does it. That's the thing. He does the task. That's all he does. So if the routine is broken, he can't stop and think. He can't think through, oh, it's not happening the way I thought it was supposed to be happening, so what do I do now? He just stops, or he freezes. Well, sometimes when that happens for him, the little autistic part of his brain kicks in, and he just does whatever is habitual for him. So that helps him kind of push through his executive functioning failures. So I'm kind of actually thankful for his autistic traits, because they really do help him cope quite a bit with his fetal alcohol spectrum disorder things. So let's get real about fetal alcohol. I love my son, but it's hard to raise these kids. It is really, really hard to raise these kids because, like I said, they're very impulsive. They often can't tell right from wrong. They're often doing things that they really shouldn't be doing. They have behaviors that are not conducive to living peacefully within families. They don't get along particularly well with others sometimes. And sometimes they get along too well. So they're given a lot of trust because they can appear sociable and happy and friendly. But underneath of that, there might be a lot of confabulating, what looks like lying. They can be prone to stealing, and then just doing super impulsive things. And as they get older, a lot of times, unfortunately, these kids, their impulses lead to violent acts. So it's a little bit beyond. Sorry, I've never gotten a call during a scope. That happened. Right. So violence, right. This can lead to violence. And the fact is, this is permanent brain damage. The alcohol gets in the brain while it's developing, when the baby is a fetus in the womb, in the uterus. This is permanent brain damage. It's 100% preventable. All you have to do is not drink and gestate. That's my big message. I beat that drum all the time. Please do not drink and gestate, because the damage that it does to these kids' brains is devastating. I have a son who should be able to function pretty well in the world, who might even have been able to learn to be independent, who might have been able to learn to do enough math to do his own finances, to get a job, to get a little place to live, even though he's not on the higher functioning side of things. But because of that fetal alcohol damage, he will never be able to do those things. He will never be able to drive. He will never be able to balance a checkbook or pay a credit card bill or even get along too well in the grocery store with a handful of cash. He's about to be 19 years old and he still can't count money very well. And he has His IQ doesn't even qualify as cognitive impaired. So that's some serious damage. So there it is. That's my scope for today, talking about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And again, I'm talking about this stuff because I'm about to tell you all about my big, big vision. I'm about to embark on what I know is the plan for the rest of my life, what I am supposed to be doing. And it has everything to do with helping adoptive families who are raising kids like this get the resources that they need, because there are very little resources available for us. So you're going to hear a whole lot more from me about adoption issues, about mental health issues that are related to adoption and adoption issues. So if you found this valuable, look me up, marykalbach.wordpress.com. That's my blog. You can find me on Facebook, Mary Kalbach Emergent Hippie. You can follow me right here on Periscope and get your friends to follow me, Mary Kalbach Emergent Hippie. And I will see you tomorrow for Tip Tuesday.